Chapter 115. After returning to the stockade village, he first went to the workshop that made Rui's nectar. The autumn weather was a bit chilly, but in the workshop, several men topless were working in full swing. Although their daily work was very simple, they obviously didn't feel bored and were full of energy at all times. It was no wonder. What they did here was not tiring work. It was much easier than herding horses or doing farm work. Not only that, they had meat to eat and wine to drink every day. At night, they could sit on the kong with their wives and count the money. After counting the money, they would hide it. When they were in the mood, they could do something shameless. Life was very comfortable. Li Yi stood outside the workshop and looked at it from afar. Everything was normal, so he turned around and walked in the direction of his home. When he reached the door, he smelled a faint aroma of food before he stepped into the yard. Xuanhuan went to the shop with him in the morning, so it was naturally not her cooking. Mississippi Lu, not to mention that she didn't know how to cook. Even if she did, Li Yi might not dare to eat it. In the past, it was Xuanhuan or himself who cooked, so Li Yi subconsciously thought that the two sisters didn't know how to cook. It was not until a few days ago that he found out that Rui also had extraordinary cooking skills. Even Xuanhuan, who had learned some of his skills, couldn't compare. Later, it was Xuanhuan who told him that before the old master left, when Xuanhuan and second miss were young, it was always the eldest miss who cooked. Xuanhuan learned most of her cooking skills from her. If it was in the future, she would probably be the kind of girl who was good-tempered, had extraordinary cooking skills, and had a black belt in taekwondo. She would be the goddess in the hearts of countless men, and of course she was also the ideal type for Li Yi. But at that time he couldn't be more ordinary. This kind of goddess-like girl probably wouldn't even look him in the eye. Now that he thought about it, in his previous life he often gave up his seat to old people on the bus, occasionally helped old grannies cross the road, and was willing to help others without pocketing the money he picked up. In the end there were rewards. "My husband, you're back. After you've washed your hands, come and eat." As soon as Li Yi stepped into the courtyard, he heard a gentle voice. After living together for so long, Lu Rui was no longer surprised by Li Yi's habit of washing his hands before eating. Recently, Li Yi came back around this time every day. By the time he reached home, the meal was already prepared. The feeling of always having someone waiting for him at home was very good. Not far away, Xuanhuan had already taken the initiative to fetch water for him. An imperceptible smile appeared on Li Yi's face as he strode over. "Brother Qian, you seem to be in a hurry. Where are you going?" "Rui Square." Rui Place sounds unfamiliar. Could it be a new brothel in the prefecture? "Brother Qian, you're not being honest. Why didn't you call little brother over for such a good thing? Why don't we go together? We can see for ourselves what kind of girls from Rui Place are like." On the streets of Qing Prefecture, Fang heard the conversation between two scholarly men. He pursed his lips and muttered, "I was right, wasn't I? This is obviously the name of a brothel. Second mistress still doesn't believe me." Li Yi glanced at Fang. This fellow had righteously told him that other than Rui Place, nothing else was suitable for the name of the shop. The few of them had rejected his suggestion of Six Spirits Place. Their opinions were unanimous. He had no choice but to name the shop Rui Place. If it had been called Six Spirits Place, there would not have been so many misunderstandings, right? Of course, the name Rui Place was not without its merits. At least it could attract a large group of men who did not know the truth. Li Yi was extremely suspicious that the scholars who bought the Rui necklaces only had the same intentions as what the scholar had said. Behind the two of them, the faces of the four young girls were filled with excitement. They usually stayed in the village and rarely came to the prefecture. There were many things here that were full of novelty to them. With these young girls, Li Yi did not have to stay in the shop all the time. He could completely be a shopkeeper who did not have to do anything. When he had time, he would go to the brothel to listen to music. When he was in a better mood, he would accept the invitations of the girls and have a meal with them. They could talk about their dreams and life. Come on, have fun. After all, he had a lot of time. At the entrance of Rui Place there were already many people waiting. Among these people, there were those who had already placed orders and were here today to collect the goods. There were also those who had specially come to place orders. Fang carried a large bamboo basket on his back. It was filled with the latest batch of Rui necklaces. "The shopkeeper is here." "Shopkeeper, hurry up and open the door. We have been waiting here for a long time." After collecting the goods, I still have to go back and study. When the crowd saw Li Yi and Fang walk over, there was immediately a commotion. "Everyone, don't push. Those whose orders say that they will be delivered today, please wait over there for a moment. Those who need to place an order, please come this way." Li Yi could already handle these situations easily. As he spoke, the crowd immediately split into two groups. They consciously lined up and stood in their respective areas. "I say, shopkeeper, can't you bring more goods every day? There are so many people here, how is this enough?" A certain man couldn't help but complain when he realized that his order had been queued up for several days. As soon as his words left his mouth, it immediately resonated with the people around him. "That's right, shopkeeper. The goods every day are really too little. I placed an order 2 days ago and only received it today." "What, 2 days ago? Did you cut the queue?" "I placed an order 7 days ago." Li Yi stretched out his hand and gestured for the crowd to be quiet. He then explained, "Everyone may not know this, but the production process of this ruidu is quite complicated. We work day and night, but we can only produce a few dozen bottles a day. If we produce more, I'm afraid that the efficacy will decrease." The crowd was obviously very satisfied with this explanation. The ruidu was a strange item that had never been seen before. It was normal for the production process to be complicated. No wonder it was so expensive to sell it for 1 tael of silver. And this shopkeeper was obviously a merchant with a conscience. In order to not reduce the efficacy of the ruidu, he was willing to earn so much money. He was really a model for other shops. For a moment, the crowd couldn't help but look at him with respect. After a while, the customer who received the ruidu left with satisfaction. The crowd who placed the order and could only pick up the goods after a few days were not too dissatisfied. After all, where could they find a shopkeeper who was so considerate to them? It was fine to wait for a few days as long as the quality of the goods was guaranteed. Seeing that there were not many ruidu left and a thick stack of orders on the counter, Fong couldn't hide the silly smile on his face. He glanced at the door and saw someone coming in, so he hurriedly walked over. "I'm sorry, today's ruidu is sold out. If you didn't place an order in advance, you can only place an order and pick up the goods after a few days. Are you the shopkeeper here?" The person who came was a young man. He glanced sideways at Fong, and a trace of disdain appeared in his eyes when he saw his clothes. "Didn't you hear the young master asking you a question? Are you the shopkeeper here?" The two young men behind the young man glared at Fong when they saw that he didn't speak. Seeing the disdainful expression on the young man's face and the arrogant look of the two people behind him, Fong narrowed his eyes. These people didn't come with good intentions. Chapter 116. What are you doing? Fong crossed his arms and stared at them with wide eyes. An invisible force pressed towards them. Since they were not customers and seemed to be here to cause trouble, Fong did not stand on ceremony with them. Putting aside the fact that Fong had a foundation in martial arts, being stared at by such a burly man was very oppressive. Normal people would feel a bit scared if they saw this. Fong's ox-like eyes glared and a chill suddenly rose in the young man's heart. He couldn't help but take a few steps back. After he came to his senses, he felt a bit angry, but he didn't dare to glare at him. He suddenly raised his voice. "Who is the shopkeeper of Rui Workshop?" Li Yi had actually been paying attention to this side since they entered the door. At this time he stood up and slowly walked over. He looked at the young man indifferently and asked, "What is it? You are the shopkeeper of Rui Workshop?" The young man looked at him with surprise. He didn't think that the famous shopkeeper of Rui Workshop in Qing and prefectural city would be such a young scholar. "What is it? Speak." The young man in front of him, from his expression to his attitude, was full of the appearance of a playboy. He didn't look like he was in business. If it wasn't for the principle that those who came were guests, Li Yi wouldn't have bothered with him. "Our young master is looking for you. Of course it's a good thing." The young man didn't say anything. Another young man beside him spoke up. "Our young master will buy the recipe for your ruidu for 1,000 liang of silver." After the young man finished speaking, a faint smile appeared on the young man's face. He had a card up his sleeve. 1,000 liang of silver. They had probably never seen so much silver in their lives. A mere formula could be sold for 1,000 taels of silver. The young man was waiting for the poor scholar to be deeply grateful to him. Then he would respectfully hand over the formula of the ruidu. That way he would have achieved his goal. Recently, this thing called ruidu had spread among the social circles of Qing and prefectural cities' young ladies and scholars. Everyone fought to buy it and it had become a fashion trend. However, the store only supplied a few dozen bottles a day. There were so many scholars and beautiful women in Qing and prefectural city. Most people wanted to buy it but couldn't. After he bought a bottle through various channels, he personally tried it and immediately realized the value it contained. In the summer it was cool and refreshing, and in the autumn, it repelled mosquitoes and insects. When one was tired, a few drops would immediately refresh one's mind and increase one's vigor. The effects of the ruidu were just like its name, extremely miraculous. In his opinion, this small shop in Qing and prefectural city was far from enough. If he opened a few more shops, how much profit would he be able to make? If he opened the store in the capital and entered the circle of true nobles, he could already see a mountain of silver floating in front of him. Of course, all of this was under the premise that he could successfully obtain the recipe for ruidu. However, he was not worried about this. Before he came, he had already investigated the owner of this store. He was a commoner with no background. If the other party was unwilling, he had countless ways to achieve his goal. Fong. As soon as Li Yi spoke, Fong immediately straightened his body. See the guest out. Li Yi said lightly and turned to walk in the direction of the counter. 1,000 liang of silver for the recipe for ruidu? Even if this number was increased by 10 times or 100 times, he still wouldn't agree. Whether it was the ruidu or the perfume and spirits that were still in the planning stages, the core technology was alcohol distillation. This was related to his future business. Li Yi couldn't sell distillation. Gentlemen, please? Fong stood in front of the three and said coldly. 1,000 liang of silver for the recipe for ruidu? Dream on. Although Fong was a bit stupid, he was not a fool. According to the store's recent income, he could earn 1,000 liang of silver in less than a month. Even if Li Yi agreed to sell the recipe for 1,000 liang of silver, Fong would not agree. The change happened too quickly. The young man couldn't react in time, and his smile froze on his face. Things were a little different from what he had expected. In his previous view, if the other party was not tactful and didn't want to sell the recipe, he could increase the price. He could also accept 2,000 liang of silver. If the other party didn't know what was good for him and brought up his identity, then everything would be settled. But who would have thought that this scholar wouldn't even give him a chance to bring up his identity? He turned hostile like flipping a book. How dare you? Do you know that my master is? A young man beside the young man revealed an angry expression. He had just opened his mouth to say a few words when he was glared at by Fong. Fong didn't care who this guy was. Even if the county magistrate was here, he had to be reasonable. Whoever wanted to rob Fong of his money was his enemy. He clenched his fist and revealed a fierce expression. He said fiercely, "If you don't leave, I will personally send you out." Seeing the burly man in front of them clenching his joints so hard that they made cracking sounds, the three of them turned pale and couldn't help but take a few steps back. The young man raised his head and said coldly, "In this prefecture city, it's best to lower your heads. Otherwise you won't even know how you die. How dare you threaten me?" A trace of anger appeared on Fong's face. He casually picked up a chair beside him. The young man was about to say something, but he was dragged away by the two young men beside him. "You run fast. If I see you again, I will break your legs," Fong said fiercely. He looked at the backs of the three fleeing figures and put down the chair heavily. "These bastards wanted to buy our formula for 1,000 taels of silver. Why didn't they just rob?" Fong was still angry even after the three of them had left for a long time. Li Yi sat behind the counter and looked thoughtfully at the bustling pedestrians on the street outside. Today's foppish young master had also given him a reminder. An ordinary man is innocent, but a man's wealth is a crime. The profits of the ruidu were huge, and as time passed, it would definitely attract the attention of more people. Even in the future, this kind of robbery was common, not to mention in this era for some people the restriction of the law was extremely low. Moreover, the launch of ruidu was only the first step. If the business became bigger in the future, it was hard to guarantee that it wouldn't be targeted by more people. At that time, what should he do? After all, he was just a commoner. If he really encountered such a thing, should he let Fong beat them up? Beat them up? Or beat them up? Obviously, this was not the solution to the problem. An individual's martial strength was completely useless at this time. Just as Li Yi thought of this and frowned, someone walked in from the entrance of the shop. Chapter 117. Old Fong turned around and saw a few men following behind a young man walking in from outside. The young man was dressed in luxurious clothes and had an extraordinary temperament. However, the few men behind him all had solemn expressions. They were equipped with swords and sabers at their waists, and their faces were expressionless. They looked at people as if they were owed a few hundred taels of silver. As soon as they walked into the shop, a formless, murderous atmosphere filled the air. Seeing this, the two women who were about to enter the shop turned pale and hurriedly retreated. They had just sent away a few people, and now another group of troublemakers had come? A trace of anger appeared on Fong's face. He suddenly stood up from his seat and stared at the men with an unfriendly look. It seemed that if they dared to show any malicious intent, he would attack them in the next moment. Seeing his aggressive look, the young man was stunned for a moment. The men behind him all changed their expressions and looked at Fang with vigilance. One of their hands was already on the hilt of the saber at their waists. Fang's expression became a little ugly. Then he became serious, which was rare for him. These people were all not simple. If he had to face one of them, he had the confidence to win. However, if he had to face all of them at the same time, he had no hope of winning. Fang and the men were confronting each other nervously. The young man walked past him and saw Li Yi coming out from behind the counter. He asked with some surprise, "Did you really open the Rui workshop that has recently become famous in Qingyan Prefecture?" Li Yi wanted to say, "Are you blind?" But he remembered that the man was a young prince, so he held back. As soon as he turned his head, he saw Fang and Li Xian's attendants making eyes at each other affectionately. He couldn't help but feel a chill and said, "What are you doing?" Li Xian followed his gaze. After a moment of surprise, he waved his hand and said to the men, "Why are you following me? Get out." Among the men, the leader saw the young man in the shop and finally felt relieved. He waved his hand and the men immediately left the shop. He and Li Yi were old acquaintances. He knew that the young man had cured the princess's illness and was a friend of the young prince. He would not do anything harmful to the young prince. However, he was puzzled as to why the young man always had masters following him. Although the big man in front of him looked simple and honest, his strength could not be underestimated. The young woman who followed him last time had unfathomable martial arts. Even in the whole jianghu she could not be an unknown person. Seeing the scene in front of him, Fang finally realized that the young man and the son-in-law knew each other. He was also relieved. He walked out of the shop and happened to meet the eyes of the man. There seemed to be some kind of fire when their eyes met. Inside the shop, Li Yi looked around for a moment. After a while, he withdrew his gaze and said to Li Yi, "That Rui do, give me 100 bottles first. I will take them with me when I leave." Last time he heard from Li Yi that he was going to open a shop in Qingyan Prefecture to sell Rui do. He was curious for a while about what this Rui do was. Later, because he was busy with other things, he temporarily forgot about it. Recently, Li Xian had also heard about the Rui do that was popular in the circle of socialites and scholars. In his heart he did not believe that the two were the same thing. He heard that it had the effect of repelling mosquitoes. Today he wanted to buy some to show his filial piety to the princess. Only then did he find that the shopkeeper of the shop was actually Li Yi. 100 bottles? Li Yi glanced at him. Don't even mention 100 bottles, there isn't even a single bottle. Today's Rui do has already been sold out, and the order list is 7 days later. If you want to get your hands on the Rui do, you'll have to wait at least 7 days. What's more, Rui do can only be bought at most 20 bottles at a time. This rule was set by Li Yi. The purpose was to prevent some people from buying a large amount of Rui do and then reselling it at a high price. 7 days? Li Xian was stunned for a moment, then directly shook his head and said, 7 days is too long. I can't wait that long. He reached out and patted Li Yi on the shoulder. His eyes were bright. Although he did not say anything, the meaning was already very clear. After all, the two of them were friends who went to the brothel together. If he did not even help this little bit, it would be a little too unfriendly. Li Yi sighed and said, "The production process of Rui do is very complicated. It takes several hours to produce a bottle of Rui do. What's more, we lack manpower, so it is impossible to produce a large amount." "What's so difficult? Can't I find some people from the prince's mansion to help you?" Li Xian was stunned for a moment, then he waved his hand, indicating that this was not a problem at all. Li Yi shook his head. Having manpower is not enough. To produce Rui do, not only do we need to build a workshop, but we also need to buy raw materials, which requires a lot of money. What's more, we can't put all our energy into Rui do. Rui workshop is about to start releasing perfume and spirits, so we also need manpower. I don't need to trouble you with these things. I'll ask them to speed up the work. In 3 days we can't gather 100 bottles of Rui do, but there will be 50 bottles. You can send someone to pick it up at that time. Perfume? The expression on Li Xian's face was stunned. What is this? A puzzled expression flashed across his face. He turned to look at Li Yi and murmured, "Spirits, how strong is it?" Li Yi took a small porcelain bottle from the counter and opened the lid. A very strong wine fragrance floated out of the bottle. This was the alcohol obtained after more than 10 times of distillation. Although it had been blended, the alcohol content was still several times higher than the so-called spirits on the market. Good wine. As the wine fragrance entered his nose, an abnormal blush appeared on Li Xian's face. His body swayed and he grabbed the counter. He looked at Li Yi and said with burning eyes, "I'll help you with the manpower and workshop. You just need to tell me how this spirit is brewed, and, that perfume, what is it?" Li Yi couldn't understand why a person with such a poor alcohol tolerance would be so interested in hard liquor. However, this wasn't important to him. He looked at Li Xian with a smile and said, "How could I let you work for free? Why don't we consider this business a partnership? We'll split the profits 50-50. How about that?" "That's a good idea." Li Xian heard this, and after a moment of daze, he nodded without hesitation. He didn't want to accept other people's kindness for free. He was originally a greedy person, but he would rather give up 50% of the profits. He really didn't misjudge him. Outside the door, the leading man and Fang crossed their wrists to test their strength. Their faces were flushed and fine beads of sweat appeared on their foreheads. On the contrary, Fang looked calm and there was a hint of mockery at the corner of his mouth. In terms of fighting, he might not be able to beat him, but in terms of strength, no one in the whole Willow Leaves village could beat him. His opponent was still far behind. Next to the two of them, the faces of the few men revealed a bit of shock. Their leader was known for his strength, but compared to this big man, it was obvious that he was far from enough. Where did this monster come from? Gulp. At this time, a strong wine fragrance floated out of the shop. Except for Fang, everyone couldn't help but swallow a mouthful of saliva. Chapter 118. When the young prince, Li Xian, left with those people, he took 10 bottles of ruidu. Although it was announced that ruidu had long been sold out, there had to be some spares left in the shop. This time, Li Yi simply let him take all of it. After his step-by-step seduction, the final goal was achieved. Li Yi watched as the group left, and the smile on his face brightened. Originally, he had only wanted to start a small business. Under the condition that he wouldn't starve, he wanted to raise the standard of living a little, and at the same time he wanted to lead Fang and the others into a well-off life. Originally, the Rui workshop and the candied Ha's business could satisfy this small wish. However, in the Jianghu, some things were not as simple as they seemed. The business of ruidu was a large cake. There were probably countless people watching from afar wanting a piece of it. Li was just a commoner. He didn't want to compromise, but he also couldn't fight against the local snake in Qing and Fu. With no other choice, he could only choose to hug a thicker thigh. In Qing and Fu, there was no thigh that was thicker than Ning Wangfu's thigh. If the business wanted to grow, it needed more manpower, resources, and financial resources. It was clearly impossible to rely on just Fang and the others. They could only find others to cooperate with. Cooperating with Ning Wangfu was clearly the most suitable and the best way to solve the problem once and for all. In this small piece of land, no one dared to compete with Ning Wangfu for business. He only needed to contribute the recipe, and then he could sit at home and count the money. Although he was using the curiosity of the young prince, this was a win-win situation. The profits of ruidu were considerable. Furthermore, Li Yi also planned to work with him for a long time. Ning Wangfu wouldn't lose out, and Li Yi could use this huge umbrella of protection to be a shopkeeper who didn't have to do anything. Of course, after interacting with the young prince a few times, Li Yi also found him to be quite pleasing to the eye. He was one of the few friends he acknowledged. They were all from the old Li family. To some extent, the goodies should be kept within the family. Now that his worries had been resolved, Li Xian went back to make preparations for the manpower, workshop, and shop. He could handle such a small matter by himself. In fact, when Li Yi suggested a 50-50 split, he didn't even think about it before agreeing. This caused Li Yi to admire him even more. The young man's thinking was very advanced. Originally, Li Yi wanted to explain to him about intellectual property rights, but now it seemed that there was no need for that. In the following time, he did some small training for the girls. It took a little time to teach them how to write orders. Although the format of the order was fixed and Li Yi could write it in advance, they had to fill in the delivery date and quantity by themselves. He needed to teach them how to write the number and date. Fang also had something to do. Of course, it was not enough to have only a few girls in the shop. If there were any bad customers or hooligans, Fang had to go out personally and temporarily act as a flower protector. Everyone had their own division of labor, so there was nothing for Li Yi to do. He made a cup of tea and lazily lay in the yard behind the shop. While basking in the sun, he looked for a few books in the library in his mind to recharge. In Jianghu, it was never a burden to have more skills. Maybe they would be useful one day. The position of this yard was facing the sun, and the sun was warm on the body. Li Yi closed his eyes and digested what he had just read. Suddenly everything went black. When he opened his eyes, he saw Fang standing straight in front of him, just blocking the sun. "Son-in-law, someone is looking for you." Fang looked at Li Yi with a strange expression on his face. He wanted to say something but stopped. When Li Yi stood up, Fang added, "It is a beautiful woman." "And I got it." Li Yi nodded and turned to walk into the shop. Recently, there would occasionally be women coming over and asking him to write something on a piece of paper. He had long been used to it. Of course, there were some scholars in the beginning, but after they heard that he had to pay 1 tael of silver to write a word, gradually no one came. Being able to enjoy the treatment of a star also made Li Yi's vanity a little satisfied. However, in Fang's view it was not like this. "And I got it? What kind of attitude is this? There is a beautiful woman looking for him? Isn't he worried that I will tell the big miss?" A trace of hesitation appeared on Fang's face. After thinking about it, he still followed. Seeing that the young master was so calm, it did not seem like he had a guilty conscience. What if he was thinking too much? Li Yi walked into the shop from the back door. Several girls were practicing what he had just taught them at the counter. In the resting area opposite, a young woman was sitting there with a pretty maid standing behind her. The young woman seemed to be holding something in her hand. At this moment, all her attention was on the paintings around the wall, fascinated. Seeing the woman from afar, a trace of doubt appeared in Li Yi's eyes. He walked to the woman and asked, "May I know why Miss Zumo is here today?" He did not expect that the person who came here to find him was actually the top artist of the Jade Courtyard. Li Yi and she had some small misunderstandings before, but they had later reconciled. However, the two of them had only met twice at the poetry conference and had no further interaction. "Zumo is here to return the painting to young master." Zheng Zumo stood up, curtsied, and handed the thing in her hand to Li Yi. "Painting?" Seeing that she handed over a paper tube, Li Yi was even more puzzled. When did she take his painting? He turned to look at the surrounding walls. Not a single painting was missing? Puzzled, he untied the string in the middle of the paper tube and slowly arranged the paper tube on the table beside him. Seeing the painting of a woman in martial attire on the paper, the expression on Li Yi's face froze for an instant. Lu Rui. It was actually Lu Rui. The painting was three-dimensional, so it should have been drawn by him. However, he had only drawn Lu Rui once, and that painting was still locked in the cabinet in his room. But what was with the painting in front of him? "I'm afraid that young master took the wrong painting that day. Please return the painting that you took away to me." Zheng Zumo did not notice the change in Li Yi's expression and looked up at him. A strange feeling welled up in Zheng Zumo's heart at the thought that her painting was in the hands of a man. Coincidentally, she heard that the scholar who defeated Xin Zhao in poetry was in this Rui workshop, so she immediately brought the painting over. However, Li Yi did not give Zheng Zumo an answer. His mind was still a bit confused at the moment. If he had taken the wrong painting that day, if this painting had fallen into Zheng Zumo's hands, then the painting he had taken away that day was actually her portrait. Li Yi raised his head and glanced at her. He finally realized that the reason why he felt a sense of familiarity when he saw her at the intoxicated fragrance house was not because he went to the Jadeite courtyard with Li Xian that night, but because he had seen her portrait at the art stall. Fang walked to Li Yi's side with doubt and looked at the table. After a moment of shock, his eyes suddenly widened, as if he had seen something extremely incredible. Young master actually secretly hid a portrait of second miss. A voice, like thunder, exploded in Fang's mind. Chapter 119. Fang stared blankly at the portrait on the table. His expression was blank, but his heart was in turmoil. He vaguely felt that he seemed to have accidentally discovered a great secret. Could it be that the son-in-law was still not satisfied with the first miss, and was still thinking about the second miss? In an instant, Fang's heart fell into endless anxiety and confusion. What to do, what to do? Should he tell the first miss, or should he tell the second miss? Since he already knew about this matter, he would be disloyal if he did not report it to the first miss. But betraying the son-in-law would be unjust, and it might even destroy a good family. Old Fang would not be the culprit who would destroy a family. Secretly tell the second miss? Forget it. For the safety of the son-in-law and his own life, it was best to never let the second miss know about this. Fang, who was caught in the choice of loyalty, had a very complicated look in his eyes, and the expression on his face kept changing. Young master. Young master? Zheng Zumo finally noticed that something was wrong with Li Yi's expression and called out softly with some confusion. Li Yi came back to his senses and realized that he had made such a big mistake before. A man secretly hiding a woman's portrait. This was very thought-provoking. Fortunately, Rui and Xuanhuan did not see it. Otherwise, they would have thought that he had some improper thoughts about this Miss Zumo. "I'm really sorry. After taking the portrait that day, I didn't open it." I didn't think that I had taken the wrong one. However, the portrait is not with me at this time. I will bring it tomorrow and give it to you. Li Yi looked at her and said apologetically, "Thank you, young master." Zheng Zumo nodded and said softly. Her eyes swept over the surrounding walls, and she wanted to say something but stopped. "Is there anything else, Miss Zumo?" Li Yi seemed to have something else to say and asked in confusion. A trace of hesitation appeared on Zheng Zumo's face, and then she said, "To be honest, Zumo would like to ask young master what kind of technique you used to make this portrait so lifelike. The person in the painting seems to be walking out of the painting." She didn't dare to look up at Li Yi. She knew that it was a bit abrupt to ask these questions at this moment. Painting techniques were the summarization of a person's experiences over a long period of time. To those who were skilled in the Tao of painting, they were incomparably precious. Even she wouldn't easily teach these things to others. Rashly asking others about these things was truly a bit disrespectful. But she was too curious about this kind of technique. She thought about it all day long to the point that she couldn't eat or sleep well. If she didn't ask, it would be too painful. "Zumo, Miss Zumo," said. This was what she meant by her presumptuous request. For Li Yi, this was really not a troublesome matter. He immediately taught her how to deal with light and shadow, the change of scale, as well as the technique of composition and so on. This was not a secret, nor was it something like alcohol distillation which he was going to use to eat. There was no confidentiality to speak of. Since Zheng Zumo asked, he could not hide it. Zheng Zumo didn't expect him to agree so easily, as if he didn't care about these things at all. He didn't even say a word of refusal. However, at this moment she didn't have the time to be surprised. It was the first time for her to hear what Li Yi had said. She silently memorized it all in her heart. These days she had been studying painting by herself and she had gained a lot. In fact, many areas were only separated by a thin layer of window paper. Li Yi only needed to give her a few pointers, and she could immediately see through the clouds and see the fog. For a moment her beautiful eyes were full of splendor. As Li Yi spoke, he began to be a little surprised in his heart. The ability of this Miss Zuamo to accept things was really a little unexpected. Often he just said a sentence and she could think of the real key point. Thinking back to when he was bored, he taught Xuanhuan how to draw. Under his personal teaching, the little maid still did not make any progress for several days. Comparing the two, the gap was really too big. Fang stood behind Li Yi, watching him and the beautiful woman talking happily, and her heart became more and more complicated. The matter of the second miss had not been resolved yet, and the son-in-law was flirting here. The first miss saw it. Although the first miss was usually gentle, if she was angry it was really scary. Sigh. Things were getting more and more complicated. Fang sighed and her heart was even more tangled. "Thank you, young master, for dispelling my doubts. Zuamo is really grateful." Today's harvest was quite fruitful. Many of the things that Li Yi said were things she had never heard before. It was enough to open up a new school of painting, and all her doubts were solved today. Zheng Zuamo's expression was solemn, and she bowed to him with a serious face. The two were only acquaintances, but he was willing to teach her all these techniques. His breadth of mind was unprecedented. She had received his kindness, and even bowed to him as a disciple was not an exaggeration at all. At this time, thinking of the misunderstanding between the two before, and that she had mistakenly regarded him as a lecher, Zheng Zuamo was extremely regretful. How could such a broad-minded and noble person be a lecher? Miss is too polite. Li Yi raised his hands with a smile and said, "If you have any sisters you are familiar with who also want a 3D portrait, you can have them come to me. 10 liang of silver for one. The price is fair and I do not cheat anyone. If there are many, you can even get a discount." Just now, Li Yi was thinking that 3D painting had never appeared in this world before. Perhaps it would be very popular. Which woman did not want to keep their youthful, alluring and infinitely charming appearance so that when they grew old and faded, they could have a souvenir? Pointing at the portrait, he boasted to his descendants, "Back in the day, grandmother was also known as a beauty in Xianxia." Hearing this, Zheng Zuamo couldn't help but freeze. A portrait, 10 liang of silver? If you feel the price is not right, we can discuss it when the time comes. Li Yi said with a serious expression. If there are still people who want to learn 3D painting, I can also open a class. You only need to pay 20 liang of silver as an entrance fee, and I guarantee that you will be able to learn and master. Li Yi felt that he had found a new way to make money. He could open a training organization in ancient times and hire a few famous scholars as teachers, such as Learn Poetry from Yang Yanzhou, 30 days crash course on 8-legged essays, XX can teach you to write a good policy paper in 2 months. He could open some classes like this. He even thought of the name of the training organization. It would be called New Oriental, Learning to Cook. Which school was the best in tutoring for scientific exams? Set your sights on New Oriental of Xianxia. Chapter 120. Zheng Zimo left with the little servant girl. When she left, the expression on her pretty face was a bit absent-minded. It seemed that she didn't take his words to heart, which made Li Yi a little disappointed. Women and children's money was the easiest to earn. This was an unchanging truth. If all the girls in the brothel in Qingyan Prefecture could spend 10 taels of silver to buy a portrait, then he could at least save a few years of hard work. But thinking about it, painting all day was boring. How could it be as carefree as being a shopkeeper who didn't have to do anything? Li Yi thought about it and gave up on this idea. When he was about to go back to the yard to bask in the sun, he turned his head and saw Fang standing there, looking at him with a leisurely gaze. What's wrong? He felt a chill in his heart after being stared at by Fang and asked, "Who was that girl just now?" Fang put away his usual silly smile and asked with a straight face. Although the son-in-law was walking down the wrong path, Fang felt that the son-in-law could still be saved. He had to persuade him not to always associate with these shady women outside. The eldest miss was such a good person, why didn't he know how to cherish her? Her name is Zheng Zimo, a friend. You wouldn't know her even if I told you, Li Yi said casually. When Zheng Zimo left just now, she ordered a lot of rui nectar from here. She said that she bought it on behalf of the sisters in the Jade Yard. This immediately made her good impression in Li Yi's heart improve a lot. Zheng Zimo? Miss Zimo? Fang's eyes widened and he blurted out, "The top artist of the Jade Yard? You know quite a lot." Li Yi looked at Fang with a bit of surprise. "That's Miss Hong from the Jade Yard." Fang curled his lips and stopped abruptly after saying half a sentence. He looked back and saw that the 4 girls were still busy over there. Only then did he relax. "What's wrong with Miss Hong?" Li Yi crossed his arms and looked at him with a teasing expression. "What Miss Hong?" Fang looked at Li Yi with a puzzled expression. Li Yi looked at him and said, "I'm going back to the courtyard. Do you have anything else?" Fang hurriedly stepped aside and said, "No more, no more. Son-in-law, you go ahead. I'll look after the store. First miss, second miss." Li Yi had just taken 2 steps when Fang suddenly cried out in surprise. Li Yi glanced at him indifferently. Such a childish trick might work on a brat, but if he wanted to trick him, Fang had miscalculated. "Sister Rui?" A few crisp voices came from the direction of the counter. Li Yi looked back at the girls. Did Fang collude with them? Through the corner of his eyes, Li Yi saw that the portrait of Lu Rui that he had left on the table at the side and forgot to put away was picked up by someone. Her pretty face was slightly startled and an indescribable color flashed in her eyes. Mississippi. Lu's gaze looked over and with a slight shake, the painting was put away and held in her hand. Son-in-law, Uncle Fang. Xuanhuan followed behind Lu Rui and walked in from the outside with a smile. Fang looked at the thing in Lu Rui's hand and then looked at Li Yi. He silently took a small step towards Li Yi's side. If second miss got angry later, he could still block for son-in-law. Fortunately, they had arrived at this moment. If they had arrived a quarter of an hour earlier, they would have seen son-in-law and that Miss Zuemo flirting. Fang alone would not have been able to block the 2 misses. At this time, Li Yi also had a little fear in his heart. Fortunately, he did not draw a pig's nose or pig's ears for Lu Rui. Otherwise, the consequences would be unimaginable. Fang waited for a long time and did not see any signs of anger from second Mississippi. The expression on his face was as indifferent as ever, as if nothing had happened just now. While he was feeling curious and surprised, Li Yi had already walked forward and said to Lu Rui in confusion, "Wife, why are you here?" "I have nothing to do, so I came here to have a look." Lu Rui smiled. At this time, Xuanhuan came from behind her and put the food box in her hand on the table. She said, "Miss asked Xuanhuan to make food and bring it over. Son-in-law, Uncle Fang, sisters, hurry up and eat while it's hot." The kitchen at the back of the shop could cook, but Li Yi had been busy recently and had not had time to open a meal. Meals were usually settled at the small stalls outside. There was not much food in the small food box. Of course, it was not enough for the girls plus Li Yi and Fang, so Fang was sent to buy some food from outside. He closed the shop and moved a table in the yard. The sun was warm and the breeze was not hurried. Such an atmosphere was suitable for eating. The food that Xuanhuan brought were all ordinary home-cooked dishes. When he opened the food box and smelled the aroma, Li Yi knew that this was not made by Xuanhuan. The little maid's cooking skills were only average. Recently, under his deliberate guidance, she had only improved, but it was not to this extent. He secretly glanced at Lu Rui but did not expose her. If it was not Xuanhuan, he could ignore the otherworldly Mississippi Lu. She was the only one in the family who could make this kind of food. Today she and Rui came to Rui's workshop together, which surprised Li Yi. Previously, he had mentioned more than once that if she felt bored in the stronghold, she could manage the business of the shop in the prefectural city. However, Lu Rui seemed to have no interest in this, so Li Yi did not mention it again. Today, was this considered the lady boss inspecting the shop? When he and Lu Rui got along, there was always a strange tacit understanding. The two of them did not talk about what had happened before. Apart from not having sex according to their current lifestyle, there was no difference between them and a real husband and wife. They never blushed or quarreled, which was enough to be called a role model. Thinking of the situation when he first came to this world, he was restless in his room, thinking that he could not keep his chastity. Who would have thought that the person who pushed open the door was actually a beautiful woman? She walked in and said a few words to him. Then she smashed the wooden table to frighten the two with ulterior motives. Before she left, she turned her head and said faintly, "I, Lu Rui." These images appeared in his mind. Thinking of the current situation, Li Yi was surprised to find that the distance between the two of them had unknowingly been shortened by too much. Perhaps one day in the future, when he completely accepted and integrated into this world between him and her, it might be possible. After the meal, the few young girls excitedly talked about the scene of everyone fighting over Rui's clothes in the morning. The little maid interrupted from time to time. Lu Rui listened with a smile. Fang sat beside Li Yi, trembling with fear. He was always on guard against the second miss who could fly into a rage at any time. Chapter 121. Ning Wang Fu did not lack manpower, nor did it lack money. For everything, little Prince Li Xian only needed to move his mouth, and the people below would naturally take care of it. However, building the workshop, making the distillation equipment, purchasing the raw materials, and giving the workers in the workshop some simple training. These things could not be completed in a day or two, and required at least a few days of preparation. With sufficient funds and manpower, the production of spirits could also be put on the agenda at the same time. Moreover, alcohol distillation only had a simple purification process, which was even simpler than the production of ruidu, but the profits could not be compared. This world also had an incomparably long wine culture. From the nobility to the common people, they all treated it as an important drink in their daily lives. The reason why Li Yi did not release spirits until now was because the cost of this thing was too high. After buying a jar of low alcohol content and distilling it, there would not be much left. Distilling a few large jars of wine into a small jar, although the price would be more expensive than the original, but Li Yi currently did not have much wealth, and could not afford to burn money like this. Li Xian was not the same. He was stupid but had a lot of money and had a strong background. Even though he was a bit unreliable, but his temperament was still on the same path as Li Yi, and finding him to cooperate with was the most suitable. After eating, Lu Rui did not stay in the shop for long, and left with Xuanhuan and the others. The thing that Fang was worried about did not happen, and Second Miss acted as if nothing had happened. But because of this, his heart was even more perturbed. According to Second Miss's temperament, if she knew that son-in-law actually had improper thoughts about her, son-in-law most likely wouldn't be able to stand here well. But she actually did not have any reaction. Could it be that, between the two of them, there was really some unspeakable secret? Fang felt that he could not continue thinking about it. The implications of this matter were too big, and had already far exceeded the scope of his control. The family matters of son-in-law and eldest miss, it was better to leave it to them. After struggling for a long time, Fang didn't continue to make things difficult for himself. Li Yi didn't know that Fang's thoughts had changed hundreds and thousands of times. It was boring to stay in the yard and bask in the sun all the time. After instructing Fang to look after the shop, he strolled out of the shop slowly. Standing on the street, he heard the faint singing of, "I wish you a long life," thousands of miles apart. Coming from the brothel not far away. Li Yi was stunned and looked over. A moment later, in the brothel next to Rui Square, a young gentleman picked a remote seat and sat down. The singer on the stage was singing Shuidiao Getu, in a melodious voice. The young gentleman curled his lips. He could vaguely hear him saying words like, "no authorization," and "copyright fee." He waved his hand at the shop assistant not far away. "Sir, what do you need?" The waiter hurriedly ran over and asked with a face full of smiles. "Bring a pot of tea." "All right, please wait a moment, the tea will be served soon." The waiter responded, and not long after the tea was served. Li Yi took a sip of tea. When he looked up again, the singer on the stage had already retreated, and a few women were dancing on the stage. Their sleeves fluttered in the wind, and it was a beautiful sight. Many cheers came from the seats below the stage. When they saw the excitement, they took out a few copper coins and threw them on the stage. The copper coins hit the dancers, but they didn't dodge or dodge. It was as if they were already used to it. Li Yi watched the dance on the stage with great interest. This kind of dance that was filled with the beauty of classical elegance was very pleasing to the eye. At least, in his opinion, it was more than 1,000 times better than the so-called South Korean dances of the future, where people showed their navels and thighs on the stage. It was just that the behavior of the audience below was a little vulgar and spoiled the scene. However, in this era the status of actors and actresses was extremely low. Although many people liked to watch them perform, deep down they looked down on these actors and actresses. This was different from the celebrities of the future generations. Everyone was an actor. One was so miserable, while the other was like the moon surrounded by stars. If these seniors knew how the actors of the future generations were treated, would they feel gratified or would they lament? The brothels here were equivalent to the theaters of the future. They mainly performed plays, songs, and dances. It was one of the few places of entertainment for the people living at the bottom of society. Li Yi also came here to watch the songs and dances, listen to the plays, and experience the entertainment activities of the people of this world. In the past, he naturally had no interest in these things. The entertainment activities of the 21st century were very developed. When he was bored, he could choose to watch movies or surf the internet. Unfortunately, there were only a few forms of entertainment in this world, so he could only make do with it. After paying 10 coins at the door, he could stay here for a day and watch as many programs as he wanted. Of course, other expenses had to be calculated separately. There were about 100 seats in the brothels. At this time, most of them were not full. Li Yi drank a cup of tea for about half an hour. During this time, there were 2 performances of singing and dancing on the stage. One was an opera. The singing and dancing were not bad. As for the opera, it was really a little boring. After a while, Li Yi lost all interest. In his heart, he thought that if there was a chance in the future, he would also open a theater like this and let those singers sing popular songs. Instead of singing, they would not sing those boring plays. They would perform something like The Legend of the White Snake or The Journey to the West. It would be more interesting. The rich seemed to like this. They would buy a few actors and let them perform for them. When they were free, they could also do some unspoken rules. Just thinking about it made people envious. Sister Wan, they are coming down soon. What are you going to sing this time? Immortals at the Magpie Bridge? Behind the stage, a 15 or 16-year-old girl asked the gentlewoman beside her with a flushed face. It's time for Sister Wan to go on stage? Then we'll be able to receive a lot of rewards. Another girl said with a smile. Sister Wan sings well, so they will naturally give you more tips. That girl rolled her eyes at her and looked ahead. She immediately said, "They are already done. Sister Wan, hurry up and go up." The sweet-tempered woman smiled and waited for the people who had just finished singing to come out before she slowly walked in. At the same time, Li Yi, who had lost interest in watching anymore, stood up from his seat, paid for the tea and walked out. As soon as he walked out of the door, there was a sudden burst of enthusiastic cheers in the brothels. Li Yi stopped in his tracks. When he was about to look back, he saw a lot of people gathered at the entrance of Rui workshop, surrounding it and pointing at it. Li Yi frowned slightly and walked over quickly. Chapter 122. Everyone look, my brother used their Rui do to become like this. A tall and skinny young man in the crowd pointed angrily at Rui workshop and said loudly. Beside him, a young man stood there. His face was swollen and his eyes had become thin slits. One could vaguely make out his human features. My brother heard that the Rui workshop sells Rui do that can refresh the mind. He wanted to use some when he was tired from studying. Who would have thought that after using it he would become like this? The young man's face was full of grief, and his voice was clearly heard by the surrounding crowd. As soon as he finished speaking, the surrounding crowd all looked at the young man. Someone couldn't help but laugh out loud. This face, it looks like a pig's head, ha. Haha, now that you mention it, it really does look like it. Seeing the young man's swollen head that looked like a pig's head, the crowd automatically ignored what the young man had just said. Even though they knew it was a bit rude, they still couldn't help but laugh out loud. Hearing the laughter around him, the young man's swollen face immediately turned the color of a pig's liver. Ah, soy pig's head. At this moment, the people who hadn't laughed earlier finally couldn't help but laugh. The angry young man's expression froze on his face. The development of the situation was completely different from what he had imagined. Shouldn't the crowd be pointing their fingers at Rui Workshop and scolding the black-hearted profiteers for selling shoddy goods and scamming customers? How did it turn out like this? Damn it, who brought up the topic of soy pig's head just now? The young man's throat moved, and he secretly swallowed a mouthful of saliva. Then he gave a few people in the crowd a look. Someone immediately understood what he meant and shouted loudly. Boycott the profiteers. Boycott Ruidu. Black-hearted merchants, drag them to the officials. A few abrupt voices came from the crowd, but they were quickly drowned out by the crowd's discussion. I heard that Spring Fragrance restaurant has a new dish recently. Their soy pig's head is really the best in Qingyan Prefecture. Should we go try it another day? Sai, what's so good about soy pig's head? Braised pig's feet are the best. I think pig's ears are delicious. They're perfect to go with wine. A few people in the crowd looked embarrassed. The young man stood at the entrance of Rui Square and opened his mouth in shock, but he couldn't say a word. The young man's face was flushed red. He looked more like a pig's head that had been soaked in soy sauce. What's going on? Who are you people? What are you doing here? All of a sudden, a powerful voice rang out from the front. Everyone's voices stopped abruptly as they turned to look in the direction of the voice. A tall and sturdy man walked out of the shop. When the young man saw that everyone was no longer discussing the matter of the marinated pig head, he was overjoyed. He quickly wiped away his saliva and a resentful expression immediately appeared on his face. He pointed at the man and said, "It's all because of your Ruidu that my brother has become like this. Today you must give us an explanation." What? Old Fong looked at the young man beside the young man and was also shocked. Whose family is this braised pig head? You? Don't even think about changing the topic. The topic of marinated pig head could not be discussed anymore. The young man pointed at Fong and said loudly, "If you can't give me an explanation today, I'll definitely report you to the authorities. Give us an explanation. We can't let this black-hearted shop go." That's right, we can't let them go. Among the crowd, more and more people began to shout along with them under the uproar of a few voices. Those who were watching a good show could never complain about things getting out of hand. After all, the pig head looked delicious, and it looked miserable. Under the influence of sympathy, the balance in everyone's hearts gradually tilted in their favor. Fong's expression was ugly. If that pig head was really caused by Ruidu, then the matter was serious. It would have a serious impact on Ruidu's voice in the future. Behind him, the pretty faces of a few girls turned pale. They also didn't know how to deal with this matter. "Fong, what's the matter?" A familiar voice came from the side. Fong turned his head and looked as if he had seen his savior. He was relieved and said hurriedly, "Young master, you came at the right time. He said that there's a problem with our Ruidu." He pointed at the young man and said, "Young master, look." Li looked in the direction where Fong was pointing and was shocked. "This pig head. How did it become like this? Isn't it because of your Ruidu?" The young man pointed at Li Yi and took out a small porcelain bottle from his pocket. It was the bottle of Ruidu and said angrily. Li looked at the young man and a trace of suspicion flashed in his eyes. Most of the Ruidu was alcohol. For a small number of people who were allergic to alcohol, it was possible for them to have an allergic reaction, but it was impossible for it to become like this. Moreover, when he was selling the Ruidu, he had already made it clear that there shouldn't be such a serious allergic reaction. Could it be that these guys are here to blackmail me? Li looked at the young man thoughtfully. At this moment, there was a sudden commotion outside the crowd. "Make way, make way." A few constables in black separated the crowd and walked in. The middle-aged constable who led them said loudly, "What's the matter?" A trace of joy appeared on the young man's face when he saw the constable, and he hurriedly walked over and said, "Constable, my brother used the Rui nectar sold in this shop, and now he has become like this. The evidence is conclusive, and these people still want to deny it. Please uphold justice for us, constable." "Hey, how did it become like this?" The young man's appearance also startled the constable. At this moment, the young man secretly gave him a look. The middle-aged constable's expression didn't change. He waved his hand and said, "If you have any grievances, you can talk about it when we return to the county government. Disperse, disperse." Hearing this, Li Yi's eyes slightly narrowed. Generally speaking, for such a small matter, constables would only suggest the two parties to mediate in private. They wouldn't easily bring it up in court. This young man didn't even mention whether he was willing to mediate or not, but the middle-aged constable couldn't wait to bring them back to the county government. Of course, Li Yi wouldn't believe that there wasn't something fishy going on. Moreover, when he saw the two of them secretly exchanging glances, he coincidentally saw it. Hearing that they were going to the county government, Fang's expression changed slightly. The faces of the girls behind him were even paler. At this moment, Li took a step forward and pointed at the young man. He said, "Constable, before we go to the county government, can I ask him a few questions?" "What questions?" "You'll have the chance to ask him when we get to the county government." The middle-aged constable impatiently waved his hand and said to the young constables, "What are you waiting for? Take them all away." A secret smile appeared on the young man's face. Once they arrived at the county government, he would be the one to decide who was right and who was wrong. The burly man and scholar before him were no different from fish on the chopping board. So what if we let him ask? It won't take much time. At this moment, a faint voice came from outside the crowd. Chapter 123. Although the woman's voice was clear and melodious, it was clearly not what the young man liked to hear. "Who said that?" "The constable is speaking. Is it someone you can interrupt?" The young man turned his head with a dissatisfied expression and looked towards the direction of the voice. The light blue constable uniform that the woman wore was slightly different from the other constables. At this moment, she was standing outside the crowd with her arms crossed in front of her chest and a saber hanging from her waist. Her gaze was indifferent as she looked over. The scene that the young man saw when he turned his head had clearly stunned him. However, at this moment, the middle-aged constable's foot was already flying towards him. "Shut up." The middle-aged constable's foot caused the young man to stagger. When he raised his head, his face was already filled with a flattering smile. He walked in front of the young woman and asked, "Boss, why are you here?" The young man was momentarily stunned by the inexplicable kick. He didn't understand why the middle-aged constable was acting so crazily. Bringing the shopkeeper of the Rui workshop back to the county office had been personally ordered by the county lieutenant. He was only a lowly constable. Why didn't he listen to the county lieutenant's orders? Of course, he didn't know that the middle-aged constable knew better than anyone else that this young lady was someone who even dared to point at the county magistrate and scold him. Furthermore, even after being scolded, the county magistrate didn't even dare to fart. Compared to the county lieutenant, it was obvious that this young lady who hated evil and couldn't tolerate even the slightest bit of sand in her eyes was much more difficult to deal with. The woman didn't pay attention to the middle-aged constable and glanced at Li as she said indifferently, "What do you want to ask?" "Ask away." "Thank you, constable." Li cupped his hands towards her and thought that the young lady of the Li family was still reasonable. He turned his head to look at the young man whose head was swollen like a pig's and asked, "You said that your pig's head right now is because you used our shop's ruidu?" "Pig's head." The young man didn't expect that this scholar would stab him in the heart as soon as he opened his mouth. He almost spat out a mouthful of blood as he gritted his teeth and said, "Yes." "Do you remember when you bought it?" Li asked again. 3 days ago, the young man answered without hesitation. In his heart, he rejoiced that he had done his homework before coming here. Otherwise, he wouldn't be stumped by this scholar's questions. "Do we buy it directly or through an order?" "Buy it directly." "What was the price of ruidu at that time?" 1 tael of silver per bottle." "Who did you buy it from that day?" "You gave it to me personally." "Do you still remember the time?" "Around c." The young woman crossed her arms and looked at Li with interest. Although there was no shortage of constables in the yamen, most of them were good-for-nothings. There was a shortage of smart people like her. If he could have such a smart subordinate, it would save him a lot of trouble when investigating cases. Be a constable? Li was stunned for a moment and then shook his head. Although being a constable sounded prestigious, the status of a constable was not high. It could only be considered a temporary job, and the nature of the job was very dangerous. He was not like the young woman in front of him. As a descendant of the royal family, she actually had the interest to be a constable in a small yamen. He did not know if the people above him were out of their minds. Of course, Li was not curious as to whether this princess or princess had the idea of going deep into the grassroots to experience the people's feelings. In any case, he had no interest in being a constable at all. "Are you the shopkeeper of this Rui workshop?" Seeing that Li refused, the young woman did not show any disappointment on her face. She turned to look at the signboard of Rui workshop, threw over a piece of silver and said, "I've long heard of your ruidu. I happened to pass by today. Give me a bottle." "I'm sorry, today's ruidu is sold out." Li regretted giving all the stock to Li Xian just now. He threw the silver back and said, "You don't need the silver. Come and get it tomorrow when the constable patrols the street." Although Li Yi was not a generous person, he was clear about gratitude and grudges. If she did not give him the chance just now, today's matter might be a little troublesome. It was just a bottle of ruidu. He was really embarrassed to accept the silver from her. Well, I'll come again tomorrow. The young woman did not stand on ceremony. After taking back the silver, she waved her hand and said lightly. Then she turned around and disappeared on the street. Li Yi looked at the direction in which she left, and a thoughtful expression appeared on his face. In the morning, there was someone who wanted to buy the formula of ruidu by force. Now, there were these two people who were stirring up trouble. It was obvious that they were in cahoots with the middle-aged constable. It seemed that more and more people had their eyes on ruidu. Chapter 124. Brother-in-law, what if the shopkeeper of the Rui Bazaar refuses to hand over the formula for the ruidu? What should we do? A young man paced back and forth in a side hall on the east side of the yamen of Anshi prefectural city. He could not help but raise his head and speak to a person sitting in a chair in the hall. A middle-aged man with a gaunt face sat calmly on a wooden armchair facing the door. He had a dignified expression and a dignified expression. He raised his teacup and took a sip before saying, "What's the hurry? Bring them back and lock them up in prison for a few days. Let them starve for 3 to 5 days before bringing them up for questioning." The young man was stunned for a moment before an expression of admiration appeared on his face. His brother-in-law was indeed worthy of being the county magistrate. His methods were ruthless. If an ordinary person were to starve in prison for 3 to 5 days, they would not even have the strength to speak. He reckoned that he would not dare to refuse. At that time he might even be able to save the 1,000 taels of silver. As he thought about the explosive sales of the ruidu and the huge profits it would bring him, he could not contain his excitement. Just as he was thinking about this, there was movement at the door. The middle-aged constable walked in with his head lowered. "How was it? Did you bring them back?" The young man asked impatiently when he saw the middle-aged constable. The dignified man sitting in the wooden armchair also slowly put down his teacup and looked over. "Sir, I did bring 2 people back, but—" The middle-aged constable bowed to the county magistrate and recounted what had happened with a bitter expression. "What? Constable Lee messed things up?" The young man's face showed a hint of anger when he heard this. He said, "Which Constable Lee? Didn't you tell him that this was the county magistrate's order?" The middle-aged constable looked at him without saying a word, but he secretly criticized in his heart. That was Constable Lee we were talking about. Even if the county magistrate was involved, what use would it be, let alone a mere county magistrate? Constable Lee? The middle-aged man stood up from his chair with a serious expression on his face. No one knew what he was thinking about. As the county magistrate of Anshi County, he was in charge of arresting thieves and handling cases. Regardless of whether it was constables or constables, they were only his subordinates. However, Constable Lee was an exception. Although he didn't know Arrestor Lee's identity, County Magistrate Liu had specifically warned him not to offend Arrestor Lee on the first day he arrived at the county government. He couldn't afford to offend her. Before that, he had never heard of any woman who could be a constable. However, even though he was full of doubts, County Magistrate Liu did not reveal more things to him. Since then, he had always turned a blind eye to the behavior of this female constable. Fortunately, although the other party abhorred evil and always intervened whenever he encountered injustice, making the county government prison unprecedentedly lively, other than that, he did not cause much trouble to him. He turned to look at the middle-aged constable and asked with a frown, "Constable Lee knows that innkeeper?" "I don't think so," the middle-aged constable said after giving it some thought. He was very familiar with Constable Lee's meddlesome character. This time it must have been a coincidence. "Let's talk about this matter later." The middle-aged man thought for a moment before he lightly said. He then lifted his foot and stepped out of the door. "Brother-in-law," the young man chased after him for 2 steps. Seeing him waving his hand impatiently behind him, he finally stopped. A trace of anger appeared on his face. When he received benefits he was so straightforward, but when he needed him to do something he always shirked the responsibility. As a county magistrate, he was actually afraid of a constable under his command. If he had known this, he would not have come to this cheap brother-in-law. He held a small porcelain bottle tightly in his hand, and his eyes were burning. No matter what, he was determined to get the formula of ruidu. After experiencing 2 small twists and turns yesterday, when Li stayed in the shop, he always felt that there were several pairs of eyes staring at him in the dark. Just thinking about it made him uncomfortable. This should be regarded as obsessive-compulsive disorder, which was incurable. he decided that after returning to the stockade village today, he would rest for a few days. When Prince Ning Mansion settled everything and the shop in the city opened, no one would dare to have any ideas about Ruidu anymore. Of course, with so many orders previously, the Ruidu still had to be opened every day. However, it was only for customers to pick up the goods according to their orders in the morning, and the shop would not continue to sell it. From a certain point of view, this could be considered hunger marketing. When those shops opened in a few days, the young masters and ladies who didn't manage to buy the Ruidu would probably trample the doors of the shops until they broke. Today there were only him and Fong in the shop. These days, Li was tired of eating outside noodle stalls, so he simply cleaned up the kitchen at the back of the shop and cooked for himself. He bought some eggs and sesame oil. The rice was egg-fried rice, which was simple and convenient. Speaking of which, he had not eaten it for a long time. Although he did not particularly like to eat it before, he still missed it a little at this time. Sitting in the shop, Fong smelled the fragrance coming from the backyard. His throat involuntarily moved twice, and from time to time, he glanced in the direction of the kitchen. The shock in his heart was indescribable. It was not unusual for the men in the stockade to know how to cook, but if this person was the son-in-law, then it was very unusual. Moreover, just smelling the fragrance made him salivate. If his wife had such cooking skills, Fong was afraid that he would wake up every night laughing in his dreams. After a while, Li Yi served the egg-fried rice on 2 plates. Among the white rice grains, the golden eggs were vaguely visible, and the fragrance assailed his nostrils. In this era where cooking was the mainstream, it was the first time that Fong had seen such a legendary dish as egg-fried rice. Son-in-law, is this edible? Fong raised his head and looked at Li Yi with some suspicion. Li Yi glanced at him and ignored Fong. He minded his own business and tasted it with a spoon. Although his cooking was not as good as his mother's, it was still not bad. With Li Yi testing the poison first and not showing any strange expression on his face, Fong immediately felt relieved. He found a small jar of wine from the counter and returned to the dining table. Li Yi raised his head and glanced at him. This guy actually dared to eat egg-fried rice with wine. He did not know if there were others who did this later, but it was definitely unprecedented. Learning from Li Yi, Fong tasted it with a spoon. A satisfied expression immediately appeared on his face. Delicious, it was really King delicious. When he went back, he must let his wife learn from him. A woman's cooking was actually not as delicious as the son-in-law's cooking. Even if she did not find it embarrassing, he would feel ashamed for her. With this in mind, when he reached for the jar of wine, a figure walked in from outside. Chapter 125. A woman in a light blue constable uniform walked into the shop. Fong's hand, which was reaching for the wine jar, paused. He was stunned for a moment and then turned to look at Li Yi. Li Yi was actually waiting for the female constable to take the Ruidu, then he could close the shop and go back to the stockade village. He was thinking that if she didn't come back by the time he finished his meal, he would send someone to send her to the county government office. Now he could save himself the trouble. Putting down the spoon in his hand, he stood up and took out the Ruidu that had been prepared for her. When he handed it to her, he subconsciously said politely, "Have you eaten yet, constable? How about having a meal here before you leave?" Whether in the original world or now, this sentence was a very common greeting. Food was the most important thing for people. Whether they could fill their stomachs was related to their survival. It was also the most important issue for people in the ancient times and now. Therefore, when they met, people often asked, "Have you eaten?" or, "Do you want to have a meal at home?" to show their concern for the other party. Over time, it became a conventional greeting and gradually became the most common greeting when people met each other. The standard answer to this greeting was, "Thank you, I have eaten." The two exchanged a few more polite words and then parted. One was enthusiastic and the other was polite. Both the host and the guest were happy. Li Yi was waiting for the female constable to decline and leave so that he could finish his meal and go home quickly. Seeing that she didn't respond for a long time, he raised his head and saw that she was looking at the egg-fried rice on the table. The next moment, she turned to look at him and said lightly, "All right." The smile on Li Yi's face froze. He felt like he had shot himself in the foot. The female constable's unconventional behavior made him unable to react for a moment. He was stunned for a while and then said, "Then have a seat first. I'll go get you some rice." After all, she had done him a favor twice. Li Yi wouldn't be so stingy that he couldn't even afford to treat her to a bowl of egg-fried rice. After a short moment of surprise, he turned around and walked towards the direction of the kitchen. The female constable walked to the table and put her knife aside. She sat down casually and looked at the egg-fried rice on the plate. A rare look of doubt appeared in her eyes. Ever since she was young, she had tasted delicacies, from delicacies to street food, but this was the first time she had seen this kind of food. Just by smelling this unique fragrance, her appetite was aroused. Ever since the female constable sat across from him, old Fong started to feel a little uneasy. One of the reasons was due to her identity, but the other reason was the pressure he felt from her. This female officer was an expert. Old Fong knew very well that he wouldn't be able to defeat someone who could make him feel this way if they were to really fight. Wine. The female constable's beautiful eyes lit up when she saw the wine jar on the table. She reached out and took the wine jar. After opening it, the fragrance of the wine flowed out. A trace of surprise appeared on her face. She picked up the wine jar and took a big gulp. A blush appeared on her pretty face. She wiped the corner of her mouth and couldn't help but exclaim, "Good wine." When Li Yi walked into the shop with a plate of egg-fried rice, he saw such a scene. It seemed that regardless of gender or alcohol tolerance, the old Li family loved good wine. This female constable was usually like Lu Rui, always with a cold and unapproachable face. After seeing good wine, she immediately changed her attitude. "Where did you buy this wine?" The female constable put down the wine jar and looked up at Li Yi. "I brewed it myself." Li Yi placed the egg-fried rice on the table in front of her, sat back in his seat and started to eat. The wine she drank just now had been distilled a few times. It should be around 40% alcohol. Fong had a headache for 2 days and hadn't touched wine for a long time. He had only recovered recently. However, it seemed that he wouldn't be able to drink this wine today. Without waiting for the female constable to speak again, he continued, "If you want to buy it, you can wait for a few days. This wine will be sold in the Rui workshop." Hearing this, the female constable didn't ask any more questions. After taking another sip of wine, she put the wine jar beside her and tasted the egg-fried rice. Her beautiful eyes lit up again. She raised her head and looked at Li Yi in surprise. Whether it was the Rui Du, the strong wine, the weird painting on the wall, or the food that she had never seen before, this scholar had a lot of weird things around him. Fong didn't enjoy his meal to his heart's content. He met the female constable who ate for free. The wine that he got from his son-in-law with great difficulty was taken by her, and she had no intention of returning it. The food that was supposed to be for 2 people was divided by her. Fong wasn't full either and felt depressed. He didn't even have the taste of the food. After eating and drinking, the female constable went to patrol the streets as usual. Her alcohol tolerance was not bad, even Fong couldn't compare to her. She drank all the wine in the small jar and her expression didn't change. She was supposed to patrol the streets. There might not be a rule in the Jing kingdom that forbade constables from patrolling the streets after drinking. However, this wasn't something that Li Yi could worry about. After buying some things on the streets, she closed the shop with Fong and rented a horse carriage from a carriage shop not far from the shop. Then she slowly drove out of the mansion. After returning to the stockade village and passing by the school, Li Yi stood outside the door and listened for a while. Qin Qing was teaching the naughty brats to memorize rules for a disciple. Education had to start from when they were young. Although he didn't know what kind of path they would take in the future, it was worth it to do something for these children after being stared at by so many pairs of admiring eyes for so long and hearing them call him Mr. from the bottom of their hearts. Rules for a Disciple was the introductory reading material that Li Yi had chosen for the naughty brats. The rhythm was catchy and the words were easy to read. It was close to the vernacular. While they were learning how to write, they could also learn the principles of how to conduct oneself, as well as all kinds of common sense and etiquette. The naughty brats were still young, so it was important to cultivate good values. In order to prevent them from becoming like their parents when they grew up, they had to be taught these correct values from a young age. In order to make it more interesting, Li Yi made all the original allusions and the rules for a disciple into short stories. Every day he would let Qin Qing teach a few sentences to the naughty brats. Then he would intersperse them with a few stories such as getting rid of evil, fighting tigers and fighting dragons. The naughty brats loved to listen to these kinds of stories so they would remember them more firmly. Of course, even in this era of feudal orthodoxy, Li Yi still didn't want the naughty brats to grow up to become stupid, loyal and filial people. What he taught them had been greatly edited and modified to conform to the mainstream Confucian ideology of this era, but it wouldn't severely suppress the naughty brats' nature. After listening for a while outside the school, the naughty brats were all very obedient. When Qin Qing read a sentence, they would read a sentence. The school was orderly, no different from when he was here. Afterwards he went to the workshop to take a look. The daily demand for Rui Du was not small, but there was a limited amount of manpower in the stockade. Everyone was working against time. Fortunately, this situation wouldn't last for long. In the next 2 days, Li Xian would send someone over to observe and learn the distillation method. After a few days, Ning Wangfu's shop would open for business, and the pressure here would be reduced to the minimum. Chapter 126. In the morning he sent someone to deliver Rui Lu to the shop, and Li Yi could enjoy his vacation. The weather was good today. It was early autumn and the leaves had not fallen yet. There was not much of a bleak feeling on the mountain. The shouts of the naughty children filled the gentle grassy slope. As a teacher, Qin was much more responsible than Li Yi. She taught seriously every day. It was rare for the naughty children to have a day of extracurricular activities. They ran happily on a small grassy slope by the stream, revealing their lively nature. Qin stood not far away and smiled as she watched the naughty children. After spending time with them, her impression of the naughty and mischievous children had greatly changed. They now truly looked like a female teacher. Not far away from her, Lu Xiaohu was playing a role-playing game with a group of boys. He liked to play the role of Sun Wukong the most. He brandished a wooden stick with great vigor. The other naughty children watched from the side, their eyes filled with envy. According to the story of Journey to the West, the chubby naughty child who played the role of Buddha was supposed to subdue him and press him under the five-finger mountain. However, when he saw how powerful the stick was, he immediately hid far away and did not dare to get close. Xiaohu, be careful. Don't hit the others. Qin warned him from afar. Lu Xiaohu responded, threw down the stick and ran away with the naughty children. About 100 feet up the grassy slope, Li Yi had already used a bamboo stick to skewer the meat, brushed it with sauce and placed it on an iron rack. Below the rack was a burning charcoal fire. The fragrance of roasted meat spread everywhere. Not far away, Fong, who was roasting fish caught from the stream on the fire with a few men, silently swallowed a mouthful of saliva. He decisively handed the fat fish he had just skewered to someone else, ran to Li Yi's side and sat down. He gave Li Yi a silly smile and stared at the roasting rack, unwilling to move his eyes away. Further away, the women of the village gathered together and laughed. After a while, Xuanhuan ran over and ran to Li Yi's side. In a soft voice she said, "Young master, the second miss asked if the meat is ready. Let her wait a little longer." Li Yi poked at the charcoal fire with a wooden stick. Haste makes waste. Roasting meat required patience. Mississippi Lu, on the other hand, was free. All she needed to do was to open her mouth. Li Yi himself, on the other hand, had become a free roaster. "Oh," the young maidservant replied. Just as she was about to run over, Lu Xiaohu and a group of naughty children ran over excitedly. Sir. Lu Xiaohu handed over a small white thing in his hand and said, Sir, we just caught a rabbit. Sir, please roast it." When Fong saw the rabbit, his eyes lit up. Rabbit meat was tender and delicious. In the past, when he was a teenager like this, he had secretly roasted it many times. However, there was one time when he accidentally burned his clothes. When he returned home, his parents pressed him down on the Kong bed and gave him a good spanking. Since then he hadn't eaten it again. Li Yi took the rabbit that was not much bigger than his palm. This rabbit didn't seem to have much meat. Roasting it wouldn't even be enough to fill the gaps between his teeth. Furthermore, it was such a white and soft little thing. He really couldn't bear to do it. At this time he felt someone tugging on his sleeve. He turned his head and saw that the young maidservant's eyes were full of pleading. "Young master, don't eat this little rabbit, okay?" Li Yi had never been immune to the young maidservant's coquettish attacks. He stuffed the rabbit into her arms and said, All right. I won't eat it. You can take it and play with it." The young maidservant carried the rabbit away happily. Fang's face revealed a regretful expression. Rabbit meat was really delicious. "Excuse me, where does Li Yi live?" In the Willow Leaf Village, a young and handsome man stopped a villager and asked, "Who are you people?" The man looked at these strangers and asked with a vigilant face. The village was isolated from the outside world. On normal days, outsiders would rarely come here. This young man was dressed luxuriously and had an extraordinary temperament. The men behind him had weapons on their waists. At first glance, one could tell that they were not ordinary people. Why did these people appear in the village? Don't be nervous. I am Li Yi's friend. I have something to discuss with him, the young man said with a smile. The man looked suspiciously at the handsome young man in front of him. Seeing that he didn't seem to have any evil intentions, he pointed to the front and said, "The young master is not at home right now. Walk along this road. After about a quarter of an hour, you will see a small stream. You can find him there." Thank you. The young man cupped his hands and led the few people to walk in the direction pointed by the man. The man looked at the backs of the few people walking away. He scratched his head and turned to do his own things. Regardless of the purpose of these strangers, they couldn't delay the young master's business. If they didn't have evil intentions, it would be fine. But if they had bad intentions, they would be seeking death in their own territory. Young master, slow down, slow down. A middle-aged fat man followed behind the young man with his forehead full of sweat. After walking such a long mountain road, it was a little hard for him to bear with his physical strength. The fat man's surname was Wang. He was a housekeeper of Ningguang Fu. He single-handedly managed the outside business of the Wang Fu. This time he came with the young master to discuss the cooperation of Rui Lu. This housekeeper Wang had long heard of the Rui Lu that had become popular in Qing, and recently. This was an elegant business and was suitable for Ningguang Fu. He had been thinking about when to ask his superiors if he should intervene in this business. However, he hadn't thought that this young master, who idled around all day and did nothing but work, would also take care of these matters. He immediately had him build a workshop and arrange for people. After a series of orders, the housekeeper was slightly dumbfounded. This was a good thing for the Wang Fu. After all, no matter if it was a commoner or a noble, no one would say no to money. Especially when he saw the strong wine that the young master took out, housekeeper Wang's eyes began to shine. This wasn't strong wine, this was clearly shining silver. However, the workshop was built in the Wang Fu, the people were provided by the Wang Fu, and the goods were sold by the Wang Fu. In the end, the profits had to be split 50-50. In this world, no one dared to do business with Ningguang Fu like this. The young master didn't understand these things and casually agreed. He turned his head and ordered the servants of the Wang Fu to do it. However, as the housekeeper of the Wang Fu, he had to maximize the profits of the Wang Fu. He couldn't agree to such an absurd method of distribution. The reason why housekeeper Wang insisted on coming this time was because of this matter. He really wanted to see who had the guts to even dare to take advantage of Ningguang Fu. By the stream, Fang didn't know how much saliva he swallowed. Just as he was about to take the first skewer of meat that Li Yi handed over to him, a slender white hand suddenly appeared and snatched the meat skewer before he could. Under Fang's stunned gaze, the handsome young master bit into the meat skewer. There was a surprised expression on his face as he praised, "Delicious." Chapter 127. Fang stared blankly at the handsome young master eating with his mouth full of oil and a satisfied expression. He felt a burst of anger in his heart and stood up with a whoosh. It was fine that the female constable snatched his wine. After all, the other party's identity was there and he couldn't beat her. The first batch of meat roasted by the young master was sent to the ladies. Eldest miss and second miss were there, so it was fine for him to wait a little longer. However, even this gigolo dared to snatch the roasted meat that he had been craving for a long time. Fang couldn't stay calm. If this gigolo didn't know the young master, he would have slapped him. At the same time he stood up, the men behind Li Xian also stood up. Their aura was equal to Fang's. However, other than looking at each other affectionately again, they didn't do anything extreme. It wasn't the first time they had dealt with each other. The guards knew that this man wouldn't do anything to the young master. Fang also knew the background of these guys. The reason why he didn't make a move was mainly because the other party had more people and he was afraid that he would be at a disadvantage. On the other side, seeing that there were a few unfamiliar people who came to the young master's place and seemed to have a conflict with Fang, the men who were roasting fish not far away immediately stood up and walked over quickly. "You guys go over there and wait. Don't spoil the mood." Li Xian waved his hand at the guards and found a clean stone. He sat opposite Li Yi and watched Li Yi turn the iron frame on the charcoal fire. He couldn't help but say, "This roasting method is rare. Even the old royal chefs in the prince's residence can't make it taste as good as this." There was no technical difficulty in roasting meat. Whether the roasted meat tasted good or not mainly depended on the sauce. This was a secret recipe that Li Yi had found after flipping through dozens of cookbooks. Although the taste was slightly reduced because of the lack of a few seasonings, it was still considered a rare delicacy in this world. If you want to eat it, roast it yourself. Li Yi saw that his eyes were fixed on the roasted meat in his hands and handed some to him. Li Xian was actually eager to try. After taking it, he imitated what Li Yi did and brushed a layer of sauce on it. Then he put the meat skewers on the charcoal fire and slowly turned them. There were light footsteps behind him. Rui walked over and looked at the young man sitting opposite Li Yi. She asked, "Husband, this is husband?" Li Xian raised his head to look at the elegant woman. Beside her was the woman who had been by Li Yi's side in Qing and prefecture. She seemed to be his wife's sister. The sisters were so beautiful. She turned to look at Li Yi with an envious expression. This was the blessing of having two wives. Tiske. Li Yi stood up and briefly introduced Li Xian to Rui. He only said that Li Xian was from Qing and prefecture and was a business partner of his. As for his identity, he didn't reveal it. Hello, madam. Li Xian didn't treat himself as a prince at all. He stood up and bowed with his hands clasped in a very thorough manner. Lu Rui never asked too much about business matters. She just greeted him out of courtesy and walked over to the woman's side. Sun Wukong, I'm calling you. Do you dare to answer? On a grassy slope not far away, a certain mischievous child raised his gourd and shouted. Lu Xiaohu didn't wave his rod again. This time, it was the scene of Sun Wukong teasing the silver-horned king. Li Xian listened with interest. After roasting the meat, he stood up and ate as he walked over to the mischievous child. As he left, he pointed at the fat middle-aged man beside him and said, "Oh right, this is housekeeper Wang. He has always been in charge of our business outside. You can discuss with him how to operate the Rui Du and liquor business." Housekeeper Wang. Want some roasted meat? Li put down the things in his hands and looked up at the shrewd-looking fat man. He extended his hand and handed over a roasted meat skewer. No, let's talk about cooperation first. As housekeeper Wang spoke, he smelled the fragrance of the meat and couldn't help but salivate. He subconsciously reached out and took a bite. It's crispy on the outside and tender on the inside. It's fragrant and tempting. It's really delicious. At this moment, housekeeper Wang had really forgotten about his business and couldn't help but praise. He was a glutton himself. Normally he wouldn't be happy without meat. That was why he was so fat. As the housekeeper of the Wang residence, he had eaten many delicacies. In terms of taste, the skewer in his hand could be ranked at the top. After a while, housekeeper Wang threw the skewer to the side and wiped his mouth before speaking again. The Rui Du business, how about another skewer? Looking at the meat skewer that Li Yi handed over, housekeeper Wang swallowed his saliva. He stopped mid-sentence and extended his chubby hand again. With his usual appetite, this little bit was really not enough. After eating a few skewers of roasted meat and drinking 2 bowls of the rice wine that Li Yi brewed, housekeeper Wang sat beside Li Yi and patted his stomach with a satisfied expression. Rubbing his stomach, he said, "We've eaten and drank. Thank you, Li brothers, for your hospitality. Let's talk about doing business together first. The Wang residence will provide manpower, build the workshop and rent the shops. When the time comes, we still have to arrange for people to produce and sell. Isn't it a bit inappropriate to split the profits 50-50? Then what does housekeeper Wang mean?" Li looked at him and asked. 370, housekeeper Wang said after some thought. He had actually been very considerate of Li Yi with this distribution ratio. In the prefectural city, the merchants that worked with Ning Wang Fu all saw this giant umbrella of protection. After all, if they could form a relationship with the Wang Fu as long as they followed the rules and did their business in the prefectural city, they wouldn't encounter any trouble. Of course, their investment was also great. The Wang Fu wouldn't manage many things, but they would take 70% of the profits. This time, the Wang Fu needed to build the workshop, rent the shops, and arrange manpower. He only contributed a secret recipe. Only taking 70% of the profits was already very considerate of him. If the other wasn't a friend of the young prince and had treated him to a delicious roasted meat, giving him 20% of the profits was already very generous. 370? Li Yi stilled and then said with an embarrassed expression, "How can I accept that? The Wang Fu has done so much. I feel bad for only taking 30% of the profits. How about 40 and 60? Raising his head, he saw Li Yi's righteous expression as though he was giving up a great profit. Housekeeper Wang was stunned. It was like 10,000 horses galloped through his heart. Chapter 128. Ahem, Li brothers have misunderstood. Housekeeper Wang coughed dryly to hide the awkwardness on his face. Of course, the manor takes 7. All of Ning Wang's businesses outside were managed by housekeeper Wang alone. In Qing, and he was a person of status. If anyone else dared to speak to him like this, housekeeper Wang would have stormed off in a huff. However, the person in front of him was an exception. The cooperation in the business of Rui Du and hard liquor had already become a foregone conclusion. This was not something that housekeeper Wang could change. After all, this matter was decided by the little prince. He was only a servant in Ning Wang Manor. At most, he was a servant with a slightly higher status. He had no right to veto. Furthermore, the profits of these two businesses were so large that they were guaranteed to be profitable. Each year they could bring in large profits for the manor. If they succeeded, he would have a part of the credit. All he could do was try his best to earn as much profit as possible for the manor. The little prince could not personally ask about these matters. The little prince didn't know anything, so he had to do these things. Housekeeper Wang, you are wrong. Li Yi sighed and looked at him leisurely. Presumably, Housekeeper Wang is an understanding person. You should know how much profit the Rui Du and hard liquor can bring once they are mass-produced, right? He could not deny this. Housekeeper Wang nodded and said, Rui Du is indeed a wondrous item. It is popular in Qing'an. If production can be increased, it can even be sold to Jingdou. As for the hard liquor, it is far better than anything else in the wine shop. The profit is immeasurable. Li looked at him and asked with a smile, then has Housekeeper Wang ever heard of intellectual property? Intellectual property? Confusion appeared on Housekeeper Wang's face and he couldn't help but ask, what is intellectual property? It was not an easy matter to explain what intellectual property was to an antique from hundreds or thousands of years ago. Li Yi thought for a moment and said, although the profit from Rui Du and hard liquor is great, without the recipe for Rui Du and the method to produce the hard liquor, no matter how great the profit, it is just empty talk. Housekeeper Wang cannot deny this? Of course, Steward Wang answered without hesitation. In Butler Wang's opinion, are these two things more important, or are the manpower and workshop more important? Li looked at him and asked. Steward Wang stopped talking. Of course, he understood that it was useless to have the manpower and workshop without the formula. The premise for the prince's mansion to obtain such a huge profit was that the young man in front of him could give them the formula of the Rui Du and the method of producing spirits. But the problem was, would anyone dare to negotiate with the Wang family like this? As it turned out, there really was. For a long time, those merchants had been trying to curry favor with him and establish a relationship with the prince's mansion. Why was everything reversed when it came to him? Housekeeper Wang's expression was a little ugly. It seemed that the other party was determined not to give up any profits. Moreover, regarding this matter, he could not use any means of coercion. After all, the young prince seemed to value him very much. Seeing the displeasure on Housekeeper Wang's face, Li Yi opened his mouth again and said, Rui Du and spirits are just the beginning. The perfume and soap that the Rui workshop is about to release will be more profitable than the spirits. Regardless of ancient times or modern times, women's money was the easiest to earn. A small bottle of Rui Du could make them like this. If the perfume and soap were to be released, how crazy would they be? Are you serious? Housekeeper Wang raised his head and looked at Li Yi with a fiery gaze. The profits from the spirits had already made him extremely satisfied. If there was a business that was more profitable than this, it would definitely be a great contribution. Perhaps with these contributions he could be promoted to the prince's mansion's chief steward in his lifetime and reach the peak of his life. Li Yi looked at Housekeeper Wang and smiled without saying a word. Fine, 50% it is. After thinking for a long time, Housekeeper Wang finally squeezed out these two words from between his teeth. In the happy and harmonious atmosphere, the two finally decided on the final method of splitting the profits. It was still 50%. However, Li Yi had to guarantee that if there was anything new in the future, he would first consider working with Ning Wangfu. Towards this, Li Yi naturally agreed. With such a thick thigh, would he be stupid not to cling to it? The negotiation ended happily like this. Li Yi's heart relaxed a lot. He looked around and found that there were many people gathered at the grassy slope. He slowly walked over. Housekeeper Wang stood where he was, his emotions complicated. After a long time he sighed and sat down on the ground. He picked up a few skewers of meat, brushed them with sauce and began to roast them over the fire. A few steps away from him, the naughty children formed a long line. They clasped their hands behind their backs and shook their heads. One by one they walked in front of Qin Qing and recited the lessons that the teacher had taught them a few days ago. The rules of the disciples, the teachings of the saints, the first is filial piety, the second is honesty. Love the masses, be kind, and if you have spare energy, learn literature. The endless noises made Housekeeper Wang annoyed. After the naughty brats recited it, even he who was listening at the side could recite more than 10 sentences. He couldn't help but shake his head and focus his attention on the delicacies in front of him again. On the flat ground under the grassy slope, two figures were moving quickly. Previously he lost to Fong in strength, so the guard leader was not satisfied. Now that he saw him again, he naturally had to get back at him. Of course, he wouldn't be stupid enough to continue to compete with Fong in strength. This time the two were competing in fist and leg skills. When Li Yi walked to the side of the field, they were still locked in combat. As the guard leader, his skills were naturally not bad. However, Fang wasn't someone to be trifled with. From the looks of it, the two of them wouldn't be able to determine the winner in a short period of time. On the other side, Li Xian was still holding a piece of roasted meat in his hand. His eyes stared at the rabbit in Xuanhuan's arms, and his face revealed an expression of desire. He didn't know how this rabbit would taste when roasted, but from the looks of it, it should taste pretty good. Xuanhuan felt his malicious gaze and immediately dodged a few steps to the side. "Little servant girl, how about I use this ingot of silver to buy your rabbit?" Li Xian took out a silver ingot and looked at the little servant girl as he asked. The little maidservant knew that he definitely didn't have good intentions in wanting this rabbit, but money was also very attractive to her. Although the son-in-law would usually buy her anything she wanted, she also wanted to save some money for her own use. As if thinking of something, the little servant girl's face revealed a trace of craftiness. She passed the rabbit to a sister beside her, picked up 2 stones, one big and one small, and held them in her hands. She raised her arms to the same height with her palms facing down, looked at him and said in a soft voice, "If you can guess which stone will fall first after I let go, I will give you the rabbit. If you guess wrong, you have to lose the silver to me." Li Xian was stunned for a moment. Then he couldn't help but feel that it was a pity. This little girl looked quite clever, but he didn't expect her to be so stupid. Such a simple question, did she even need to guess? Chapter 129. Li Xian was a little hesitant at this moment. Making a bet that he would definitely win with a silly servant girl was really bullying and did not match his status as an heir. However, once the idea of roasting the rabbit appeared, he could not get rid of it. Just thinking about it made his mouth salivate. Li Xian thought about it and said, "How about this? If I lose, I'll give you this ingot of silver. If I win, give me the rabbit and the silver is still yours." With an ingot of silver as compensation, he wouldn't have any psychological pressure if he won the rabbit. "If I lose, I lose. If I lose, I'll give you the rabbit, no silver." The servant girl did not agree to Li Xian's suggestion. Since it was a bet, it had to be fair. However, she was laughing in her heart. The last time son-in-law made a bet with second young Miss and Xuanhuan were fooled. This young master looked dumb and definitely wasn't as smart as son-in-law. "Then it's up to you. I guess this piece will fall first." Li Xian waved his hand and did not insist. He pointed at the slightly larger stone in the servant girl's hand. Just as he was thinking which part of the rabbit meat was the most delicious, the servant girl let go. Dong. The stone fell on the grass and made a slightly dull sound. There was only one sound from the 2 stones. Watching the obviously large and small stones fall at the same time, the expression on Li Xian's face froze. In the end, he revealed an expression as if he had seen a ghost. Things seemed to be a little different from what he had imagined. Li Xian, who didn't believe it, personally picked up the 2 stones from the ground and imitated the maidservant. He raised them to a certain height and let go. The 2 stones fell to the ground at the same time, and there was a loud thud. With a face full of doubt and disbelief, he ran to the side and picked up the 2 stones again. A person's view of the world might need several years or even decades, but to destroy it, it only needed an instant. It was very obvious that the servant girl had used 2 stones to make the dignified heir of Ningguang doubt this world. It also made him feel a strong suppression of his intelligence. "Sujie Wangzhong, you 2 come over," he shouted loudly to the side. The 2 guards who were watching the fight between Fang and the leader of the guards quickly ran over. Young master, what can I do for you?" "You 2 take these 2 stones and climb up that tree." Li Yi watched from afar as the 2 pitiful guards acted as experimenters. They released their hands from different heights, allowing the 2 stones to fall. The expression on Li Xian's face changed from disbelief to shock. He seemed to have lost his wits. He shook his head in amusement. The density of the stone was not small. Falling from a height of at most 10 feet, the resistance was almost negligible. Even if he was blind, he would not be able to see the obvious difference. "Why?" After a while, Li Xian walked to his side in a daze and murmured, "Unexpected, really unexpected. Why did the small stone fall together with the big stone? This doesn't make sense." At this time, he had already forgotten about the matter of roasting the rabbit. His mind was already filled with countless stones. There are many unexpected things in this world. Not everything goes as you imagine. For example, Li looked at him and let out a long sigh. Thinking that he was going to explain, Li Xian suddenly raised his head and looked at him. "For example, you thought I was going to give you an example. Li Yi patted his shoulder and said earnestly. This young man was still too young. In the early years of Jinghe in the Willow Leaf Village, a 16-year-old servant girl used 2 small stones to overturn the daily knowledge of the predecessors. She created a scientific method to study the laws of nature, and at the same time she started the world study of free fall. This spirit of daring to question and experiment inspired countless people and promoted the development of science. Until hundreds and thousands of years later, it still had a lot of inspiration to the world and was named one of the most beautiful physics experiments. The law of nature that objects of different mass fall at the same speed was also officially named law of small loop. Xuanhuan imperceptibly created a little trouble for Li Yi. Li Xian was obviously not satisfied without an answer. With his character that was bursting with curiosity, if he kept thinking about this matter, he might end up depressed. But it was obviously impossible to explain to him clearly. Li Xian, who had no foundation in physics, would definitely be more confused when he heard the words gravity and acceleration of gravity. This method did not work, so he had to find another way. So Li Yi tried to make him understand that there were many things in life that could not be explained. After a while, Li Xian really did not dwell on the problem of the stones falling to the ground. Why does the river always flow from the top to the bottom? Why do the leaves on the trees always fall to the ground and not fly to the sky? Why can I see my own shadow in the water? Why? Under the guidance of Li Yi, he began to struggle with these things. Li Yi felt that when he had time in the future, he should write a book called 100,000 Whys. It would definitely sell well, and at the same time, it could also open people's minds. If that was really the case, perhaps in the future, the discovery of important laws in physics would not be related to Newton and Galileo. At this world, it seems like there is no such thing. However, after thinking about it carefully, he still dispelled this idea. If he told them that the ground under their feet was actually a big ball, they would probably be tied to a pillar and burned to death as heretics before they could even sell well. Even if they were to be rehabilitated, it would be thousands of years later. Li Xian and the others did not come here today to throw stones for fun. They came to observe the workshop and learn the production methods of ruidu and spirits. If it was someone else, Li Yi would definitely not do this. It was best to firmly grasp this kind of core technology in his own hands. Even if there was a shortage of manpower and the production was a little lower, it could ensure that the business would continue to be stable. If the other party got the formula and distillation method, they would turn against him, then he would suffer a great loss. However, first of all, Li Yi still trusted this unreliable young prince very much. Second, if he did not cooperate with others, he would lose this cake sooner or later. This was also something that he had no other choice. If he cooperated with the Wang family, he did not have to worry about the secret formula being leaked. He believed that in this aspect, Housekeeper Wang could do better than him. After seeing the workshop that produced ruidu, Housekeeper Wang began to feel a little unbalanced in his heart. Such a simple thing forcibly took away 50% of the Wang family's profits. As long as he thought about this matter, his heart would bleed. However, such an extremely simple thing since ancient times, no one had thought of it. Housekeeper Wang sighed. Thinking about the perfume and soap in the future, which would be even more profitable, he felt a little better in his heart. He wanted to ask the young prince for his opinion. When he turned his head, he saw Li Xian with a puzzled face. He looked up at the sky and muttered to himself, "Why is it like this?" Chapter 130. Li Xian didn't dare to ask Li Yi the reason why the stone fell to the ground. Just now, when he insisted on asking for an answer, Li Yi asked him another question. Was the sun in the morning or at noon closer to people? Li Xian thought it was morning because the sun looked as big as a disk in the morning, but at noon it would be much smaller. Everyone understood this principle. But when Li Yi threw out the theory that it was cold in the distance and hot in the near, Li Xian began to feel that his brain wasn't enough. Today he had suffered enough blows. He was of noble birth and had received a good education since he was young. Among his teachers, which one of them wasn't a knowledgeable scholar? But today he discovered that he couldn't even compare to a little servant girl. If Li Yi threw a few more questions at him, Li Xian felt that he would go crazy. I know. The speed at which an object falls has nothing to do with its weight. If a heavy object and a light object fall from the same height, they must fall at the same time. Unsure of the reason, Li Xian decided to force himself to remember. Is it really like this? Li Yi glanced at him, picked up a leaf and a stone from the ground, and raised them to the same height again. Guess between the leaf and the stone which will fall first? When the guards beside Li Xian saw this, they looked at each other and saw a trace of inexplicability in each other's eyes. Was there a need to guess? It must be the stone falling first. The little prince wasn't stupid. How could he not even guess this kind of question? In fact, Li Xian's first feeling was that the stone would fall first. But before he said it, he began to hesitate again. After experiencing a lot of blows, he would no longer rely on his own ideas and assumptions. Seeing is believing. Before this, didn't he also think that the big stone would fall first? What's more, how could Li Yi ask him such a simple question? Obviously, Li Yi, who had become the smartest person in his heart, wouldn't ask such a stupid question. Don't try to deceive me a second time. The leaf and the stone will fall at the same time. Li Xian had a proud look on his face as he said with absolute certainty. The guards staggered at the same time and looked at each other again. This time, their eyes were filled with disbelief. Why didn't he realize in the past that the young prince was really stupid? Li Yi was a little hesitant. Why don't I not attack this poor child? Today his worldview had been tossed and turned several times. Would he be able to endure another round of torment? If he let go, Li Xian, who saw the result, would not be able to bear the blow and go crazy. Ning Wang would definitely not let him go. He would most likely immediately take Xuanhuan, Ru Yi and the others and run away. Haha, why don't you dare to let go? Did I get it right? Seeing the hesitation on Li Yi's face, Li Xian laughed and snatched the leaves and stones from his hands, saying, I'll do it myself. Li Xian had a confident look on his face. The next moment he let go. Dong. The stones fell to the ground and made a dull sound. The leaves fell slowly, making a few ripples in the air and fell silently at the feet of Li Xian. Li Xian's face was pale and his legs softened. If it weren't for the guards next to him who saw that the situation was not good and held him up, he would have collapsed on the ground. Young prince, what's wrong? The guards' faces were even paler than his. They even forgot that Li Xian had warned them not to call him young prince when they were outside. If something were to happen to the young prince, they would be held responsible. Let go of me. Li Xian broke free from the hands of the guards and stared blankly at the leaves at his feet. The expression on his face also became dull. At this moment he felt that the world he had lived in for more than 10 years suddenly became extremely strange. When he turned to look at Li Yi, there seemed to be a cloud of fog in front of him. It was hazy and he couldn't see clearly no matter how hard he tried. Li Yi was about to speak, but Li Xian immediately covered his ears. I don't want to listen, I don't want to listen, I don't want to listen. The dignified crown prince Ning fled in fear when Li Yi opened his mouth. When Li Xian arrived, he had a smile on his face, but when he left, his face was filled with worry as if he had a lot on his mind. Fortunately, his mental fortitude was much stronger than Li Yi had expected. He did not break down and he did not need the guards to support him as he walked. This caused Li Yi to have a higher opinion of him. Honestly speaking, if he were him, he would probably start to doubt the world and everything around him. It was already very fortunate that he didn't become a lunatic. Today's negotiation was very successful. The outdoor barbecue was also very successful. Young people shouldn't stay at home all day. They should go out more. After eating, drinking and playing, they could lie on the rocking chair in the courtyard, bask in the sun and hum songs. Their lives were very pleasant. Li Yi, who was basking in the sun, suddenly felt that something was wrong. He opened his eyes and saw an old face with crisscrossed wrinkles. The old man revealed an interested expression and looked at the rocking chair he was sitting on. Second great uncle. Li Yi was almost scared to death by this old face at such a close distance. He immediately jumped up from the chair, his heart still beating non-stop. Hey little boy, your chair is not bad. Where did you buy it? Second great uncle of the Lu family, the most prestigious old man in the village, looked at Li Yi and asked with a smile. This old man doesn't even make a sound when he walks. Li Yi felt depressed. He calmed his beating heart and said, I made it at Uncle Han's place. What? Do you like it too, second great uncle? Uncle Han was a lonely old man in the village. He originally had a son, but he later died of illness. Rui often asked Xuanhuan to deliver some rice and noodles to the old man. Sometimes, when Xuanhuan was busy with other things, it would be Li Yi's turn to deliver it. After a while, they became familiar with each other. When the old man was young, he knew some carpentry skills. If anyone's furniture in the village broke down, he would often repair it for free. Last time, when the chair at home broke down, Li Yi was too lazy to repair it, so he simply redesigned this kind of rocking chair and asked Uncle Han to make one for him. He could lie down and sit on it, and it was much more comfortable than the small broken chair he used to have. TSK. I didn't expect that Han brat to have such skills. Second great uncle put his hands behind his back and looked at the chair with interest. Just now he saw Rui lying on it and it seemed to be very comfortable. It was the perfect chair to bask in the sun. Speaking of which, it seemed like it was time to change the chair at home. If second great uncle likes it. Respecting the old and loving the young was a traditional virtue. Seeing that the old man seemed to be interested in the chair, Li Yi waved his hand generously. If second great uncle likes it, I can ask Uncle Han to make another one for you. Second great uncle's expression froze for a moment, then he showed a satisfied expression and said, Good boy. Since you insist on giving it to me, I will reluctantly accept it. While Li Yi was stunned, second great uncle patted his shoulder lightly, picked up the rocking chair beside him and turned to walk out the door. When Li Yi came back to his senses, he saw that second great uncle was already at the door. He hurriedly shouted, Second great uncle, wait, there's no need. I've already eaten, the old man's voice sounded, and in the next moment he disappeared with the rocking chair in front of Li Yi's eyes. This old man's hand strength is pretty good. Seeing the old man easily pick up the huge rocking chair with one hand and disappear in an instant, Li Yi was stunned. He couldn't even lift the chair with one hand. The old man had been single for decades and the effect was obvious. Chapter 131. In a magnificent mansion, there was a very elegant study. The fragrance of incense curled up in the air. 2 rows of carved bookshelves were filled with all kinds of books. Among them there was no lack of rare copies. The paintings and calligraphy on the walls of the room were all the works of famous artists. Any one of them would be a priceless treasure. A middle-aged man dressed in luxurious clothes was sitting in front of the study table. He was holding an ancient book in his hands and reading it attentively. He was the only person in the study. Other than the occasional sound of pages being flipped, the atmosphere was unusually quiet. After a while it seemed that he was tired. The middle-aged man closed the book and rubbed the space between his eyebrows. He looked at the bookshelf opposite him and said calmly, How is the investigation going? After a few breaths, a thin figure silently floated out from behind the bookshelf. Li Yi from the Li family village in Anxi County. He passed the imperial examination at the age of 17 and became famous in the county. His performance in the following 2 years was nothing special and there was no news about him. According to the village chief of the Li family village, he seemed to have lost his mind a few months ago. His mouth was full of nonsense. After he left the village he never returned. An old voice sounded in the study. Lost his mind? The middle-aged man heard this and frowned slightly. It seems that the village chief's words were not true. There was no emotion in the old voice. After a pause he said, This person is extremely talented in literature. Su Xuezheng once praised him as the #1 scholar in the Jing kingdom. His poems have reached the point that everyone in the Qing and prefecture knows about them. There is no possibility that he has lost his mind. Mr. Su rarely praises people like this. The middle-aged man said with slight surprise. If that's the case, then there's nothing wrong with his background? Although we have not found out why he appeared in Willow Leaf Village and has a family, there is no problem with his background. He did not deliberately get close to the crown prince. There was no change in the old voice's tone. He continued to state, The princess's favorite loose candied haws is his work. Speaking of which, I should thank him. The middle-aged man's expression softened. If it weren't for him, the princess would still be tormented by that strange illness. Not only that, in today's prince's mansion from the princess to the maids, the favorite Rui nectar was also made by him. In the shadow of the bookshelf, a thin and small figure was faintly discernible. The voice continued, Under the instruction of the crown prince, the prince's mansion has already reached an agreement with him, but... The old man's voice was emotionless as if he was talking about something normal. If Li Yi was here he would probably break out in a cold sweat. This old man simply knew him better than he did. After all, even he himself did not know what had happened before he transmigrated. Of course, if he knew that the middle-aged man in the study was the famous Ning Wang, the true leader of Qing and prefectural city, he would not be surprised. These people of high status and power were all extremely suspicious. They would suspect anyone who approached them, suspecting that they had ulterior motives and had ulterior motives. It was not as simple as just wanting to suck up to them. Since he has a scholarly reputation, why would he lower his status and get involved with these mundane affairs? Ning Wang's expression was slightly puzzled. After a moment he waved his hand and said, Forget it. My mansion owes him a debt of gratitude. Let him take these small advantages. Otherwise I really do not know how to reward him. Other than this there is one more thing. This time the old voice finally had a slight change. What is it? The crown prince is a little strange today. What's wrong with Xianxia? Ning Wang looked at the black shadow and asked. The crown prince has been throwing stones all day. Throwing stones? Ning Wang's expression was puzzled. Not only stones but also leaves, wood, cloth, gold, silver. There was finally some confusion in the old voice. Dong. In the prince's mansion, Li Xian asked a guard to stand on the top floor of a two-story building and let 2 silver ingots of different sizes fall from the same height. He stared at the ground without blinking. When he heard a sound, he retreated to the side and stared straight ahead as if he was thinking about something. Although there was only one sound in his ears after repeating the same thing countless times, he still found a slight difference. 2 silver ingots did not fall at the same time absolutely. The trip to Willow Leaf Village seemed to open the door to a new world for him and found a direction for his boring life. Compared with going to the brothel to listen to music, obviously he was more interested in the 2 stones. The questions that Li Yi said sounded strange but implied, which made him very curious. He wanted to find out the truth, but when he really tried to do it, he had no clue. Why 2 stones of different weights would fall at the same time? But when a piece of paper and a stone fell at the same time, the stone always fell first. If the piece of paper was crumpled into a ball, the falling speed would obviously be faster. What was the reason? Could it be that there was a force that he could not see that was preventing the piece of paper from falling? After thinking for a long time, Li Xian could only think of this possibility. He didn't care about the silver on the ground, turned around and walked outside. Little prince, where are you going? Several guards hurried to follow him. To Willow Leaf Village.